Okay, so Be'ezras Hashem, we are going to continue with something new. We've left off at the 90th year of entering the Sea of Wisdom, based on the Tzaddik and the Gaon of Yitzchak Mai Morgenstern Shlita's weekly Torah. And we've had somewhat of a hiatus, because Be'ezras Hashem, what we're going to get started with is focusing on these last 10 shirim prior to getting to 100. We're going to focus on the Avodah of Yichudim. We're going to focus on the process of unifications. And we're going to try very delicately and in accordance with my own humble understanding in its limited form to encounter what Yichudim are, what the Rebbe speaks about so often when it comes to Yichudim, what the nature of Yichudim are, where they find themselves in the system of the Rebbe's Torah, and most importantly, what does it mean for us, for an individual like myself who has no access to Yichudim in any actual way, but still wants to drink from the waters of the Am HaChachma, still wants to drink from those waters of the Tzaddikim that allow us to encounter the Rabbeinu Shlalem in newfound and more urgent ways. Now, first and foremost, Yichudim is an ancient thing. Yichudim is something that the Tzaddikim were poil from the times of Moshe Rabbeinu and onward. But the framework in which we're going to be discussing Yichudim is through the later generations of the Yechidei Hadoros, which begins with Moshe Rabbeinu, through Rashbi, Rabbeinu Ha'arizal, the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh, and Rabbi Nachman, and the Rebbe. And we're going to focus primarily on the nature of Yichudim in the last three, or including the fourth generation, which would be the Ari, the Baal Shem Tov, Rabbi Nachman, and the Rebbe's Mahalach. For the Arizal, there's Shar Yichudim, where the Arizal explains explicitly that Yichudim are sometimes higher than Torah and Tefillah. Yichudim for the Arizal means the contemplation of particular divine names, names of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that orient us to a particular strength or force of the Rabbeinu Shlalem, or particular partsuf in its relationship with whatever is taking place in that tefillah, that bracha, that experience. And the Yichudim are particular shemos that are called from the Zohar Kadosh and from previous writings that the Arizal codified and allowed to give kind of meditative techniques when a person contemplates the shem in its letters, is aware of what those names mean. A person, by contemplation, through the acts of tahara and kedusha and preparation of the self to engage in such holy work, a person has the capacity of meditating enough on the letters to experience a certain hashpa'ah, a certain drawing down of that light into the individual themselves, to the degree that the individual themselves begins to experience spiritual experiences, to the degree that an individual begins to experience an elevation of the self beyond the confines of this worldly consciousness, and a person begins to ascend, the aliyah, the Sulam Ha'aliyah, the basic nature of Yichudim is built upon the notion that just as there were Nevi'im, just as there were prophets who were capable of ascending from down below up high, or up high was able to descend down below, Yichudim are built upon the principle that through the human being's contemplation, preparation, attention, intention, activity, etc., one can truly begin to ascend the ladder of spiritual growth to begin to be masig things. The nature of hasaga means that a person is capable of experiencing something that is preternatural, something that is beyond the sensual experience of the human being's confinement within the five senses of this world. Yichudim gives access to a point of reference that is beyond the limitation of this world, so that when I come back down after that yichud, when I come back down after experiencing that spiritual bliss, that spiritual pleasure, that spiritual insight, I come back down with more awareness of the Rabbeinu Shlalem, and more importantly, I can draw that awareness of the Rabbeinu Shlalem into my life on a practical level. For the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh, there's a transition away, not away completely from the kavanah of the Yichudim of the Shemos HaPratiyim. Baal Shem Tov spent a lot of time focusing on the Yichudim of particular names, as we're going to see. In addition, the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh teaches a deeper teaching, which is that each and every person has to be able to understand their own yichud. As the Kamarna Rebbe pointed out, that by focusing on your name, the gematria of your name, a person can gain access to their particular mission in this world. We know from Meforshim that La'asalavo, there's an inyan, when a person is nifter, mehai oilam, there's a chashash, there's a danger that perhaps they will forget their name. What that means, the Rebbe explains, is that a person may come to forget their individualized mission of Avodas Hashem, wherein they are able to reveal a particular nekuda of grace, of chen, to the Rabbeinu Shlalem that no other human being was ever capable of expressing before, during, or after our lifetime. And therefore, to understand their own yichud prati is to understand what it means for me to relate to the Rabbeinu Shlalem. But for the Baal Shem Tov famously in his letter to Rav Gershon Kitiver, to his brother-in-law, when the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh was oiled to the Heichal of Mashiach, The Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh was oile to that place in the mind, to that place in the Heichalos, where Mashiach Tzidkenu, where the Neshama of Mashiach Tzidkenu is there. And the Baal Shem Tov, ever aware of the danger, the existential nature of what it means for Yid to survive in exile, ever aware of the urgency of Mashiach as the true tzaddikim are, the Baal Shem Tov asks a very simple question: Emasai ka'asimar. When are you going to arrive? When is the master going to arrive? We've spoken in the past about how mar can imply marirus, where the Baal Shem Tov's question is also not only when will the master arrive, but Emasai ka'asimar, when will the marirus go away? When will the bitterness go away? And the Baal Shem Tov heard two responses from Mashiach Tzidkenu. The first one was and the second was when they have the capacity of performing unifications like you. And the Baal Shem Tov was very overwhelmed by the second Tanai of miachdim Yichudim kamoischa, that they're going to be miachid Yichudim like you, because the Baal Shem Tov said that's going to be a very, very long time. And ultimately, Mashiach Tzidkenu is moiser to the Baal Shem Tov, 3 shemos, 3 Yichudim, which various tzaddikim have explained over time, as we're going to learn from the Rebbe's writings, which are ultimately different shemos of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, whether it be the Shem Eheke, Havaya, and Adnas, whether it be the Shem Ayin Beis, the Shem Mem Beis, and the Shem Chaf Beis. Depending on however we slice it, it's possible. The Baal Shem Tov had a Yishuv Adas because it's not so difficult. It's possible for us to live with the perspective of Yichudim Kamoischa. But the Rebbe is masbir, what does it mean Yichudim Kamoischa? What was the transition between the Yichudim on the level of the Arizal and the Yichudim on the level of the Baal Shem Tov? For this, we have to go back to the Arizal and the Rashash, that there are 2 kiluyim through which HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Megala himself to creation. We know that the entirety of creation is set up to give us a framework in which we can understand the relationship between that which is infinite and that which is finite. How the infinite, beli sof, beli gvul, or ein sof, legamri, einod mavado, how it could possibly be that that infinite, unlimited light of the Rabbanu Shalom's ever-present present can relate to a limitation and a creation that seems to be caught up in concealment. And after all is said and done, there are 2 ways that the Rabbanu Shalom is going to be Megal himself to Bnei Adam. One is B'derech Shemos and one is B'derech Oiris. One Mahalach is going to be the path of names, which is rooted in Osios, which is also Shaykh to Liman HaTorah, in the Osios themselves. So the Baal Shem Tov writes that in each and every letter there can be found Olamis, Neshamos, Ve'elikus, which means that within each and every letter I can find every single ounce of my experience in this world, every ounce of my experience in my soul, and every ounce of my experience vis-a-vis the Rabbanu Shalom. That's the secret of the derech of Shemos, where we think about the Shem Havaya, Shavis Yashem Lenegdi Tamid, where we have the Shem Havaya, B'miloi Ab, Sag, Ma, Ben, where a person has the Shem Eheke, different names that a person can contemplate. That's the derech of a shame, where the shame represents the Baal HaShem, where the name comes to represent an expression of the individual or the master who is named by that name, but because of the infinite nature of the master, of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we can't have any hasaga other than by way of a name, as the Leshem Shabbat is masbir in Hakdam Sha'arim. And these shemos that we can contemplate give us direct access, Kavyachol, direct, albeit through the name itself, which is the miracle and the secret of the name, that when we contemplate the letters of the name, we come to be aware of that which we're trying to cleave to. And that's through the meditation and the contemplation of particular shemos of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Then there's the derech of the Oiris. The derech of the Oiris, the kashas of the Oiris, are what rests behind the name. Each and every name of the Rabbanu Shalom, each and every expression of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's name represents a different way in which the Rabbanu Shalom is mashpia, his or, to human beings down below. A different way in which the bilti bal gvul, that which is without any limit, expresses itself within gvul. And those oros are the content that gives vitality to the name. A name without an or is an empty vessel. An or without a name is too much light without any handle to grab hold of it. What the Baal Shem Tov wanted us to do was wanted us to give access to the yichud of the oros, to access those oros of those shemos in our mind, which means that rather than simply contemplating the shemos and learning how to meditate and remember all the various names and permutations of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is a fundamentally valuable avodah, the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh was aware of the limited nature of the human mind and the human heart as the generations descended down and down and down to the coming of Mashiach. And he gave access to the derech of Oiris, which is not so much about contemplation of names, performing unifications by unifying one name with another, but rather it was about the contemplation of lights, the or of Chesed, the or of Rachamim, the or of Gevura, the or of Bilti Bal Gvul, the or of Gvul, the or of Yichri, the or of Yichatata, and the unification of those names. And it was this path of the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh that Rabbi Nachman brought up, and Rabbi Nachman said, I'm going to be Megala a new derech of Yichudim, a derech of Yichudim that has not been revealed before, which I believe is that it's going to be Yichudim not coming from a place of spiritual stature, not coming from a place of spiritual privilege where I have learned all the Torah that was necessary, I've davened all the tefillas that were necessary, I've done all the mitzvahs that were necessary, and therefore I'm going to spend the rest of my time with those extracurricular notions of Yichudim Kavyachol. But rather, like everything that Rabbi Nachman was Megala, he revealed the urgency and the survival instinct that is rooted in these Heilige Avodas. Which means to say that if the Arizal taught us to be Mechavin Shemos for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to be Miyachid Shemos, to take the Shem Havaya and be Miyachid with the Shem Eke, and then to be Miyachid with the Shem Adnus, and all of those three gradations. Then we move to the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh, who teaches us how to be Miyachid. What does Eke mean? Eke means Yichud Ilah. What does Havaya mean? It means Yichud Tata. What's Adnus? It's the Yichud of all of those. So it's not only what the Oireis are of the Baal Shem Tov, but whether what Rabbi Nachman was Megala was that in order to survive, in order to be a functional human being in this world where hastara shabatoich hastara is shoylet on kol ha'olam kulo, a person is going to need to gain access to these yichudim for the sake of survival. Yichudim kamaischa means that if I am not contemplating the unification of HaKadosh Baruch Hu at every moment, avadati be'oni, I've lost myself. And this is where we come onto the path of yichudim that the Rebbe is Megala. The path of yichudim that the Rebbe is Megala is a path of yichudim that, in spite of the fact that we're undeserving, in spite of the fact that mi yomer zachisi levavi, who can possibly come and claim that I have merited in my heart to contemplate the names of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to think about the oires behind the names of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to actually sit and think about Yichud Ilah, of the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu's limitless presence is everywhere revealed, of Yichud Tata, that there's a concealment that is also a revelation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in spite of the fact that I'm undeserving to contemplate these matters, in spite of the fact that a person who pretends to be Zoichet to Yehudim, unless they're a tzaddik in this generation, is obviously not telling the truth about themselves. Again, I could only speak for myself. But if we waited for permission, then the Yehudim would never take place. What the Rebbe has done is he's broken open the door and has revealed that in order to survive, a person has to be engaged in Yehudim, the active principle of unifications. What does it mean? What is this base? What is the basis behind the practice of Yehudim, behind the practice of making unifications? So we say every day, or many times a day, L'shem yichud kutshi b'richa v'shchente b'dechilu v'rachimu v'rachimu b'dechilu l'yachid shem yodhe b'vavei b'yechidu shalom shem kol Yisrael. So we speak of a yichud between kutshi b'richa and shchente. We speak of a yichud between yudke and vavke. We speak of a yichud between the letters of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's name. And so there are two ways of looking at this nature of yichudim. There's two ways of looking at the fundamental nature of what it means to be a human being, because to be a human being is to live in pirud. To be a human being is to live with multiplicity, with duality, with an apparent splitness at the heart of all things, a splitness between love and fear, a splitness between connection and disconnection, a splitness between hope and despair. We live a splintered existence, torn from the beginning to the end. The tachlis of Yehudim is to be Megala that at the heart of all pirud, at the heart of everything that appears to be so fundamentally separated, where we would be willing to bet everything that this separation that we see is absolutely and abundantly true, the secret of Yehudim is the undying belief that there is an achdus muchletes at the heart of all things, that there is a unity upon which all disparity is born, that there is a singular point of unity and unification wherein the absolute infinite nature of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's unity is ever present, from which all of the multiplicity and all of the voices and all of the feelings and all of the different colors of experience emerge. Because when we look at a world that is filled with multiplicity and numerosity and separation and division and duplicitousness and lies and fear and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, if a person does not have that anchor of achdus at the heart of all things to center everything, then a person is lost. He's pardu kol playavan. The secret of Yehudim is built upon the secret of Achdus Hashem, on the Yichud of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that everything is singular, that everything that a person encounters in this world is emergence from a singular source, even the harshest thing in the world, even the Klippa itself, even Sitra Achra itself. Nothing in this world exists without the sustaining vitality of the Nitzatz Aleki that is Mechayet. Nothing, absolutely nothing exists in a vacuum. Memela, the tachlis of Yehudim is not simply to make unifications between things that were originally separate, but rather the tachlis of Yehudim has come to the point where I realize and I remember that there's always already been achdus, that all disparity emerges from achdus, that there's an achdus at the heart of everything, And whatever shame I'm contemplating, whatever name I'm contemplating, whatever expression of the Rebbeinu Shalom I'm contemplating, whatever act of contemplation, meditation, mindfulness I'm engaged in, the fundamental goal is to come to that place of the Nakuda of Achdus, that tiny point where everything is contained into the singular drop of infinitude, where I come to lose my mind in the secret of my mind, which operates in the secret of separation and division and multiplicity. In truth, it's skewed, and my mind is rooted in an absolute unity, an absolute unspeakable unity. So when we say l'shem yichud kudshavrichu v'shchinte b'dechilu v'rechimu, what are we being miyached? What's kudshavrichu? What's shchinte? Kudshavrichu is the expression of HaKadosh Baruch Hu from above. It's all of the kochos, all of the expressions that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has decided to create in order to express himself in this limited world. All of the magical, miraculous transitions and simsumim and gvulim and mesachim and pargoidim and all of the gvulim that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has created in order to allow for there to be a fighting playing field of Bechira where we have some volitional choice as to whether we want to choose to believe in the Rebbeinu Shalom or not. All of that is kudshabrichu. It's the expression that comes from above to below. Shchinte is us. Shchinte is our capacity to receive it. Shchinte is how the individual who finds himself stuck in multiplicity and confusion, in loss and absence, how that individual prepares themselves to be ready to receive that influx, that awareness of kudshabrichu, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is me'uchad b'tachlis ha'achdus, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is unified in all matters of unification. Now we say l'shem yichud. So what are we doing when we make a unification? Are we unifying something that was separate? Or are we revealing that it has always already been revealed? Meaning to say, the first option, which would be taking two separate things and drawing them closer together, sewing them together. So we took separation, we connected it, versus coming to realize that everything has always already been unified, and the entire process of my Yichudim is to be Megala, is to reveal retroactively that, oh, what I thought was separation is in truth unity. And what the tzaddikim are masbir is that be'emes it's both. That a human being in this world starts off in disparity. Achas dibur aleikim shtayim zu shamati. HaKadosh Baruch Hu spoke once, I hear it twice. Memela, as a human being, I live in a split reality. And my job in that split reality is to be miyachid yichudim, to sew it back together, to be megalazayin, that everything that appears to be separate and opposite and in contradistinction to one another and in digression to one another is be'emes unified. I'm holding them together. Hashem, for you, I'm holding them together. But that's simply the first love. The act of actively unifying two things that appear to be separate is simply for the purpose of coming to be Megala afterwards, retroactively speaking, that in truth everything has always been unified. The tachlis of Yichudim is to come from that space of a consciousness of disparity and disunity where there are oppositional voices in the world, and to come to that place of realizing that all voices emerge from a singular point. All expression emerges from that singular point of Achdus HaBeirah, of Yichud Hashem, of Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem, which is Rachamim Rabim, unlimited nature of Or, Elikim, which is Gvul, Din, separation, disparity, which is emergent into all the symptoms of disparity. In truth, in spite of the fact that they appear to be so fundamentally different, in spite of the fact that we would likely prove, based on all of our natural evidence, that they're separate, nevertheless, there's an undying belief in the unity of all things, the Yichud Hashem of Achdus Hashem, which is the tachlis of all Yichudim. The tachlis of all yichudim, of any contemplation, of any meditation, of any mindfulness, is to come to the singular point of ein oid milvado. There is nothing other than the Rebbeinu Shalom. There's darkness, there's pain, there's light, there's joy, there's sacrifice, there's suffering, there's celebration. All of it is miyuchad b'tachlis ha'achdus and the shoresh ha'sharashim of ein oid milvado. The Chazon Ish, Zchusei HaGan famously said that ein shum eitziv ba'olam l'misha makeres or ha'oris. There's no pain, there's no sadness in the world to someone who has come to recognize the light of all lights. The way that Rav Hutner was masbir this is that there are many lights in this world. There's an or of toiva meitiv, there's an or of dayin emes, there's an or of enough, there's an or of not enough, there's an or of joy, there's an or of sadness. And if a person lives only in the oris, a person only lives in the expression of those individualized lights, so they stand that they're ready to lose themselves dependent on whatever they're feeling in that moment. But there's no sadness in the world to someone who comes to recognize the singular and unified light that rests at the core of all of the various lights, meaning to say that the achdus that we're accessing, is not an achdus, it's not a unity that negates any possibility of difference, but rather it's a unity that allows us to understand how all difference and all differentiation and all particularization and all of the splintering and the fissure and the splitness that we encounter in our lives is in truth rooted in an achdus hakoleles. It's an achdus that's megala more than itself. It's the secret of the yichud of the Rebbeinu Shleilim. That's the tachlis of the Yichudim, to come to the place of ein oid milvado mamish. Anything else is missing the point. Now, once we've gained access a little bit to what the tachlis behind Yichudim is, so there's a prerequisite that a person has to understand. Then again, if you were to learn this from a tzaddik, if you were to learn this from an actual teacher, so maybe this wouldn't have to be the prerequisite. But for me, as I'm trying to share this information, this is the prerequisite. In the absence of being deserving of entering into the avodah of Yichudim, there's going to be the hargasha of I can't live without the avodah of Yichudim. Okay, I'm undeserving to engage in actual Yichudim. There's an infinite amount of work that needs to be done prior to actually contemplating the names of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, or the Achdus of Hashem, of the Yichud Ilah, the Yichud Tata, and the Leis Aser Panim. But there comes a time where a person realizes that in spite of being undeserving, there is a certain urgency at the heart of the spiritual moment, where without access to the most powerful weapons and avodas Hashem, avadati bi'ani, I'm gone. And therefore, I need to run into the Kodesh HaKadoshim of the Yichudim Kamoischa in order to survive in this world. The Yichudim are not for Hasaga. The Yichudim are not necessarily to be masig what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants to be megala to me, to know what a hanhaga is, to know a secret shame of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Yichudim are for the sake of survival, because without the Yichudim, without the perpetual act of reunifying things that appear separate, as avadati bi'ani, I'm going to find myself lost and stuck in the disparity and the disunity of this world. And this is a klal gadol that I believe in very deeply, and I've spoken to the Rebbe about it in the past, and I've spoken to the Rebbe's Talmidim about it, and I've never been pushed away as a result of it, which is that if the words of the tzaddikim amitim are to speak to the highest people in the generation, then the words of the tzaddikim amitim speak to the lowest people in the generation as well. And just like a waterfall can be accessed at the tippy top point of its expression of water, so too can it be accessed at the lowest point of the deposit of its water. Which means to say that the words of the tzaddikim, if they're going to mean anything, they have to mean everything for each and every individual, no matter where they find themselves. And if Hashgacha Pratis has arranged for it that now in 2023 we find ourselves gaining access to the words of the tzaddikim amitim, then that means that the teachings of the tzaddikim amitim are shaykh to us, and that means that we're shaykh to Yehudim. How could it be that we're shaykh to Yehudim Kamoischa? We're going to see Be'ezras Hashem. But first and foremost, we have to believe that we're deserving in spite of the fact that we're undeserving, that we're worthy in spite of the fact that we're unworthy, and that we're called to action in spite of the fact that we have no right whatsoever in this space of action, that both truths need to be applicable in a person's mind at once. And so to begin with, what I want to try and frame as the beginning of Yichudim is that if a person waits till the authentic preparedness and readiness to engage in the work of unifications, so then l'chayra, a person is never going to arrive. But if a person recognizes that I'm never going to arrive, then a person is ready to engage in it. Because as long as I know that I'm unworthy, as long as I understand that this is not something that I've earned or gained as a result of my spiritual prowess, or that I've arrived at the top, tippy-top layer of the spiritual ladder, so then a person is engaged in the medicine of Yichudim. Then a person is engaged in Hatzalas Nefashos. Then a person is engaged in a process that is given over to each and every person, Yichudim Kamoischa. And Rabbi Nachman himself explains this very powerfully in Ois Nun Aleph in Sichos Haran. La'avod Hashem, in order to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Eini yodei mihu yochel loimer sheyavod es Hashem lefi gedulas habaris barach. Says Rabbi Nachman, it's very difficult for me to even imagine being able to say about any individual that in accordance with the greatness of God, that they can actually be worthy of serving God. Mi sheyodei ma'at megadlusa yisbarach, Eini yodei eich yochel loimer sheyavod es yisbarach. Because anybody who knows a little bit about the greatness of the Rebbeinu Shleilim understands how difficult it would be to theoretically say that I'm worthy of serving the Rebbeinu Shleilim. In truth, this is not only a human issue. There's no malach or saraf who would actually be able to be brazen enough to pride themselves on being worthy of serving God. Raka ikar hu haratzon. The most essential thing that a person can engage in this world is desire. Lios ratzonu chazak v'takiv tamid lehiskari v'lav yisparach. For a person's desire to be cultivated to a point of strength and intensity, that a person is always desiring to come closer to Hashem. V'afal pisha kol chafetzim v'roitzim lavdo. And even though we all have a desire and a yearning to serve Him, afal pikein in kol haratzon yishavim. Nevertheless, not all desires are the same. Yesh chilukim rabim b'ratzon. There are gradations to will. Even with the individual themselves, there is a shift and a change amongst the expressions of ratzon. The haklal and the essential principle she'ikr hu haratzon v'kitzufim. The main thing for a person to have in this world is ratzon and kisufim, yearning. That we should perpetually be yearning after him. In the middle of yearning after him, we daven and we do mitzvos. Meaning to say that the ikr is yearning. Yearning is dependent upon the realization that I don't know how, and I don't know when, and I don't know what. I don't know anything about how to connect to your Ribono Shel Olam. And then in the heart of that, I daven and I come closer to your Ribono Shel Olam. Ube'emes lefi galusi yisparach, says Rabbi Nachman, and in truth, in accordance with the true greatness and prowess of the Ribono Shel Olam's infinitude, kol elu ha'avodos einam klum. All of our activities are nothing. Raka kolhu b'derech ki'ilu. Everything is simply as if. Everything is ki'ilu. We are pretending. We are pretending, because in truth, all of our activities is like comedy, is like a joke, is like playing around with a wooden sword, like we saw in Maitzah Bitachon in front of the Ribono Shel Olam. And so, first and foremost, what we have to come in contact with is that it's ki'ilu. The avodah of Yichudim is ki'ilu. The avodah of Yichudim is as if I'm worthy of engaging in Yichudim, not to think that I've accessed Yichudim, but to recognize that what else am I going to do, Ribono Shel Olam? I need to survive in this world, and this is the way I'm going to survive. And so here we're going to gain access to a secret of Ki'ilu, which the Rebbe is masbir when it comes to Yichudim. There's two gradations of spiritual encounter in this world. There's something called a vak, and there's something called a gar. Everything is composed of 10 spheros. Everything in entirety of existence is composed of 10 spheros, down to the smallest particle imaginable, down up to the biggest thing imaginable. Everything can be broken down into 10 spheros. Now, these 10 spheros are broken up into two quadrants. There's the gar, the gimel ration, keser chachma bina or chachma bina and das, and then there's the zayin tachtonim, which are chesed, gvura, tferes, netzach, hod, yesod, malchus, experiences, emotions. The realm of gar, the realm of the upper unity, is oriented towards absolute unity of the Ribono Shel Olam. His kasher is a feeling of deep connectivity. Versus the Zayin Tachtoinim, or the Vak, or the Vav Ksavos of Chesed, Gvura, Tferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, without Malchus, are oriented towards disparity and separation. We know this from the Arizal, that when it came to the Gar, when it came to those three elevated spheros of contemplation, of wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, so there was no shattering there. There was no pollution there. There was nothing that broke, and therefore there's nothing that needs to be fixed, meaning to say that it remains an idealized level of accessing the ideal nature of things, which is not in relationship to the way things are revealed. But then when it comes to the Zayin Tachtonim, when it comes to the Vak, so those things have gone through a shattering, they've gone through a trauma, and therefore they need rectification. So all we have access to nowadays is the Vak, is the lower elements of our spheros, is the broken part of what it means to be a human being. What we don't have access to is the wholeness, is the absolute wholeness that HaKadosh Baruch Hu stands to reveal in the future, which is that unbroken level of gar, of Keser Chachma and Bina, or Chachma Bina and Das. But in spite of the fact that we find ourselves cut off, barred access to the essential unity of the Ribono Shel Olam, and finding ourselves stuck within the Zayin Tachtonim, within the lower levels of reality, in spite of the fact that we find ourselves cut off and stuck in separation, nevertheless, the Rebbe is masbir, based on the Rashash, that should not be cause for Yeush. Because in truth, everything in reality is built upon the holographic principle that the whole and the part are equal in fractalized forms, meaning every part that I encounter has every element of existence, even those parts of existence that are inaccessible to me. And so just as in the wholeness of the Gimel Ration, there's going to be a broken part of the Zayin Tachtonim, so too in the Zayin Tachtonim, which are broken, there's going to be a whole fixed part of the Gimel Ration. Meaning to say that if we split the world and reality into Gar and Vak, into wholeness and brokenness, that doesn't simply mean that there's an absolute realm of wholeness and an absolute realm of brokenness, but rather the particulars of unity tell me that within the realm of wholeness, there exists an aspect of brokenness of wholeness, and in the realm of brokenness, there exists an aspect of wholeness within brokenness. Meaning to say, so the lower level is brokenness, and there exists a level of wholeness within brokenness. And then on the upper level of wholeness, there exists a level of brokenness within wholeness in order to allow for there to be a relationship. So in spite of the fact that we might ever have access to the Gar themselves, to the absolute level of wholeness, where we can understand HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence absolutely without any doubt, without any concern, without any fear, without any anxiety, even though that expression might be barred to us, we still have access to the lower parts, to the Zayin Tachtonim, to the Vak. But within the Vak, when I'm engaging life as I know it, as a human being who operates from a position of after Tzimtzum, which is by definition deficient, nevertheless, within the deficiency of what it means to be a human being, there is a relative positioning and a posture wherein I can taste a hint of that light of Shleimus. And by accessing that hidden light of Shleimus that exists within brokenness, I gain access to the light of brokenness that exists within Shleimus. Meaning to say, when I touch the light of the Gar that exists within the lower parts of existence, I gain access to the lower parts of existence which exist within Gar. And what it means for us in this particular moment is that even if I'm pretending, there's an element of authenticity at the heart of pretending. And when a person gains access to that element of authenticity at the heart of pretending, they are transferred over to the light of pretending that exists within authenticity. And Mamela, by pretending in a real way, I gain access somehow, some way, by spooky action at a distance. I cross over that barrier that blocks me access to wholeness, and I begin to taste wholeness. Which means to say that as long as I'm pretending properly, as long as I'm engaged properly in the pretending act of this, with emuna, without gaiva, without feeling that magiali, I gain access to being able to actually taste the light of these yichudim. And so the Or of Ki'ilu, the first step in approaching Yichudim, is to recognize that in spite of the fact that I'm not worthy, in spite of the fact that I'm not ready, in spite of the fact that I don't know and I don't have access, nevertheless, let me dive into that feeling of not having access, not knowing, of not being worthy. And if I dive into that lishma in an authentic way, I will come to find that singular point of access, which somehow, some way, through a nace, brings me into a realm of absolute achdus. And so that even though I'm not deserving and not worthy of engaging in this avodah, nevertheless, by being aware of not being worthy of engaging in this avodah, I come to a place of authentically being deserving on one level or another of this avodah. And this is the language of what the Rebbe says in Yamachachma Tavshin Samach Tes. He says, "B'dorenu, in our generation, afilu kishanachnu nichnasim ledveikus u'menasim klas lahasig oiris elyonim shalaylamos." Even when we enter into the attempt to be davak to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, dveikus again is this secret of recognizing achdus, and we put an effort a little bit to grasp some of those ascendant lights of the worlds. This is perhaps just the smallest level of gar of the lights that are revealed to us, of the previous generations. And as a result of this, even when we spend time with kavanos and entering into aliyos and yichudim, we have to understand that we're not accessing the inner interiority of Maisa Bereshis or Maisa Merkava, because the true nature of those things is reserved for Gar. It's reserved for that elevated place that we have no access to. But the learning of them, limudim hu b'dargas vak, the study of them is something that's accessible to us, even though that's only the chitzonius. Nevertheless, we have the ability of accessing that point. And in order to make these ideas accessible to us, the Shaber Asa'oizin, to understand a little bit what it might mean in order to understand those true higher levels that we don't necessarily have access to, we have to try and begin to contemplate from within our own limited perspective how everything is contained in one singular connection. But even after all of this is said and done, says the Rebbe, even after all of this, yesh ladas, we have to understand the bechol davar bechol madrega afilu ha'elyona b'yoter, even the highest level, shayach lilmoin mizeh eze bechina dakam and adaka shayches l'chol adam k'fi madregaso bechinaso. Even when we're talking about the highest level imaginable, something that is completely inaccessible to us, nevertheless, one must always have that stubborn belief that there is something for me in this teaching. Dahainu, what does that mean? And this is going to be based on what we said. Even though generally speaking, we only grasp the lower level of vak of all things, parts of shalim. In every level, even the lower level of vak, there's an entire system, which means that there's yesh b'chinas gar prati shel osa madrega. That even within that limited level of concealment, there's still going to be access point to a level of wholeness. And that level of wholeness that exists within brokenness is directly connected to the level of brokenness that exists within wholeness. And each person in accordance with their own level. No matter where a person finds themselves in their brokenness, each and every one of us has a responsibility to access the point of wholeness from within our brokenness, which is the inner interiority and the truth of what our level is. And when we reach that level, of wholeness within our brokenness, then we gain access to brokenness within wholeness. The secret of Yichudim is the secret of pretending with the Rabbeinu Shleilim. That when I sit with the Shem Havaya, when I try and sit with Yud Kei Vav Kei of Shavisi Hashem Lenegdi Tamid, so am I truly contemplating the letters? Am I seeing the letters? Am I capable of understanding what those letters mean? Who knows? Each person in accordance with their own level. But the radical belief behind what we're going to try and uncover in these classes is that even if I don't have 1 ounce of authenticity, even if I can't find 1 ounce of feeling that is emergent from the contemplation of the Shem Havaya, the belief that contemplating the Shem Havaya, the belief that contemplating the Achdus of the Rabbeinu Shleilim, that belief itself, which is a vak, which is a malchus, which is a mechusar thing, a lacking thing, hidden within that very deficiency, hidden within that very inability to do anything other than believe and pretend, is the direct access point to the true light of the Yichudim. And this is what the Rebbe is masbir, Parshas Lech Lecha, Tavshin Samachay, where he says that the be'emes, and in truth, nefesh ha'Yisraeli, the Jewish neshama, is mishtoikek beteva l'chol zeh. A person desires Yichudim. A person desires Yichudim. A person wants to be mekusher to the Rabbeinu Shleilim. But it's impossible. And in truth, it's impossible to live a true life without accessing those lofty principles of the awareness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'chol doi v'atzmo. And this is the way of tshuva, to connect myself to the body of the King Kaviyachol, to reach Yichud, l'davik be'elyonim, to feel absolute connectivity to the ascendant worlds of infinitude. But tshuva is tluya ha'geula, and in truth, this secret of tshuva is what redemption is totally in. And therefore, this is oriented towards Avram Avinu. Shachatima sagalus ba'avodah shel Avram Avinu haina b'ri'iyah ha'elyonim b'yelechinas v'yichlu la'asos yichudim va'aliyas kamaycha. That the end of Golus that Avram Avinu asked about is the secret of Re'iyah, is the secret of seeing the Rabbeinu Shleilim Kaviyachol, even though we can't see the Rabbeinu Shleilim, it's seeing that we can't see the Rabbeinu Shleilim, is the secret of Yachlu Lasis Yichudim V'Aliyas Kamoicha. The end of exile, says the Baal Shem Tov, from the mouth of Mashiach, is dependent upon Yichudim Kamoischa, Kamoicha Daika. Like you, like the Baal Shem Tov, Mashiach says. What does it mean like the Baal Shem Tov? Not only the osios, like the Arizal taught us, which is the world of concealment, that heliga world of contemplating the shemos of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But rather what we have to access is the level of the Baal Shem Tov, which is the or, the hasaga of the pnimius of Amun and Bitachon, which is the secret of Devekas, Amuvueres, Besifrei, Baal Shem Tov, Talmid of HaKadoshim. Nevertheless, we can't let go of all of the names. We can't let go of engaging in the sirufim of the names, as we understand that's very important. But nevertheless, in the end of the day, we have to remember that the ikr is the oiris. Ach mikol makam l'fnei ha'geula. Nevertheless, before redemption, shu yom shakula Shabbos, which is the day of full Shabbos, that's when we have to think about the oiris. That's when we have to think only about emunah and bitachon. And when we enter into this possibility of pretending, and Adarabah, specifically now, as the Baal Shem Tov is masbir, as the Rebbe is masbir, as Rabbi Nachman is masbir, that in accordance with the darkness, in accordance with the concealment, a person has to throw themselves into the light. And there's specifically no better hargasha of not being worthy of entering into Yichudim and contemplating a Kadosh Baruch Hu's presence, of Soiviv Kalaman, Mamale Kalaman, and Leis Asur Panimine, of Eheke Havaya and Adnus, of the Yichud of Ner, as we prepare ourselves for Hanukkah. These names, these ideas are going to give us access. They're going to push us beyond the finish line to give us access to that secret of Yichudim Kamoischa. Be'ezras Hashem, what we're going to be basing a lot on is Maimer Derech HaYichud. I'm going to share a PDF of it. Our teachings that the Rebbe gave over to a Chavura of Mevakshe Hashem, of his Talmidim. And the Talmidim wrote it down, even though they knew they weren't supposed to write it down. They wrote it down in a way that's not really written down, so it's a complicated text. But nevertheless, there's an Eitzi Utza, there's a very clarified path of what to do, how to do, when to do. Breathing, posture. All of these things, and the Rebbe has fought very intensely against foreign elements that have entered into the process of meditation and mindfulness, and clarifications that will be made between what's healthy and what's not healthy. But Be'ezras Hashem, as we prepare ourselves for the next shlav, we're going to prepare ourselves in these shirim for Yichudim Kamoicha, to live in that place of Ki'ilu, but with the belief that Ki'ilu is real. And even though I'm unworthy, and even though we're unworthy of the task of Yichudim, nevertheless, how else does a person survive at the end of exile without the absolute unbridled belief in the achdus of the Rabbanu Shleilim? And so, Be'ezras Hashem, B'Shem Hashem Nasa v'Natzliach, we should be zoichet to the or of Yichudim, to be mechavein and to contemplate the secret of Shavisi Hashem the Negdi Tamid, to think about Hashem's name, to think about the Os Yud, the Os Hey, the Os Vav, the Os Hey, to find ourselves in the letters themselves. And through this, we should be zoichet to Gula Barachim Rabim Be'ezras Hashem.